My publisher, because I was a front list author for so long, would put me on book tour, and I would come back after 10 days of being totally wrecked and turn around and be like, was this effective? Like, how does this compare to when I'm not on book tour? Did I actually move the numbers, and could you please show me the data? And they'd be like, no, we think it works. Like, you just wasted a lot of time for your feelings on this, a lot of my time for your feelings. Like, please show me the data. And they didn't. And so I actually started publishing my own work, partly because I just wanted access to the data.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 365 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. In today's episode, I have an interview with Gail Carriger. Gail Carriger writes books that are hugs, mostly comedies of manners mixed with steampunk, urban fantasy, and sci-fi, plus cozy queer joy as G.L. Carriger. These include The Parasol, Protectorate, Custard Protocol, Tinkered Stars, San Andreas Shifter series, among others. She is published in many languages, has over 1 million books in print, over a dozen New York Times and USA Today bestsellers, starred reviews in Publishers Weekly, Booklist, Kirkus, and Romantic Times. Now, most authors know Gail for her groundbreaking nonfiction, The Heroine's Journey. And we do talk very briefly about that, as well as an awesome new book for writers she's working on that I can't wait to get my hands on. We also talk about her journey through publishing and writing, the careful curation of her author brand, her experience as a hybrid author, and so much more. Now, admittedly, I fanboyed pretty much throughout the entire interview because I was so thrilled to get to spend so much time with Gail. I had an absolute blast talking to her, and I was desperately taking tons of notes, both during the original recording and when I was editing this episode, because she is entertaining, she's inspiring, she is chock full of great wisdom and fun that I know you are going to love. And that is coming up later in this episode. But first, let's hear a word from this episode's sponsor. Is that, oh my God, on the other side of the bumper, is that a ship I see on the horizon?
Ready to elevate your writing career? Join the Cruising Writers Group Sailing the Caribbean from Galveston on February 22nd to March 1st, 2025. This time, we're focused on indie authors, with special guests Mark Leslie and Aaron Wright leading a deep dive into the world of self-publishing. You'll come away with invaluable insights, but also great memories as you connect with other writers and explore charming ports of call in Roatan, Honduras, Costa Maya, Mexico, and Cozumel. Visit cruisingwriters.com to book your spot today.
That's right, Cruising Writers. I'm looking forward to cruising in some warm tropical place in the middle of the winter and being able to talk all about books with some awesome writers. I'm so looking forward to that, and I want to thank my sponsor, Cruising Writers, for that. I also want to say a huge shout out and thank you to my patrons who support this podcast over at patreon.com/starkreflections, as well as the amazing folks who are my coffee buddies who support me over at buymeacoffee/Mark Leslie. Really appreciate what you guys are putting in to supporting the podcast. And of course, appreciate all you awesome listeners because you are supporting it just by listening. So thank you for listening. In terms of comments from recent episodes, this came out on the Twitter sphere, aka X, from Edwin Downward, who said, "The latest Stark Reflections has me remembering the teen angst-filled story that earned me a trip to the school counselor back when I took a creative writing course in high school. Fortunately, I'm not aware. I'm aware of no copies that survived that era. Yes, you're probably. It was one of the reflections I had about one of the, one of those early manuscripts of mine that's still floating around there. Yeah, it's scary, the things that can come back to haunt us. The things we wrote when we were quite young. But I'm love that sort of archives, and that leads in to the personal update. So, yeah, I was talking about working on 20th anniversary edition of my book, One Hand Screaming, and I must have been in the last episode talking about some of the special things and features and archives that I'm going to have that are going to be part of the Kickstarter. And that's for 20th anniversary edition of my book, One Hand Screaming, 20 Haunting Years. Now, I can't remember if I mentioned... I woke up one morning because I was kind of stressed out with just how big the manuscript was, how huge it was, and I still didn't have, all the tales I'd published in the last 20 years. I was nowhere close to adding that, but I trimmed about 40,000 words off the manuscript, and it was hard because there's stories I really thought were amazing, because I wasn't going to put them in the book if I didn't think they were great. I did cut an earlier story, as Edward alluded to in the comments, but these 40,000 words, there were stories, especially a couple of them, and I thought, I love them. I think I want more people to read them, but I feel really good about having cut them because the stories are not necessarily horror. And so trimming didn't just reduce the page count, which is something I needed to do, especially because this book is going through traditional distribution channels, and I have to pay for the printing of these up front to get them into the warehouse. At least in Canada, they're going to be available through traditional, bookstores and etc. So that's a huge cost to me, and that's going to save me money. Actually, it means I'm not going to lose money as I put this through, wholesale, which means, there's very little margin left for me. So that helps make sure that I'm not bleeding on every book I produce, that I'm actually making a little bit of money. So that's fine. I mean, heck, I only make a little bit of money on my trad pub titles anyway, so it's not going to be all that different. But anyways, the more important thing is not just these, the business and the costs, but it's that the collection, One Hand Screaming, 20 Haunting Years, is on brand as horror. And you look at the cover, you look at the beautiful cover art that Juan did for me. So, I mean, yes, okay, some of the horror in it is quiet horror. Some of it is, dark humor horror. But it stays a lot closer to that promise on the book's cover and the marketing I'm going to be doing for that. So that makes me feel even better. And it's like, okay, great. So now I have other things I can do with these stories. So the other things that have happened in the last week is my designer came back with some gorgeous designs for the beer label. And this is for the tie-in beer that's going to be brewed for October 2024 by Counterpart Brewing here in Kitchener-Waterloo. One Hop Screaming. So Juan made art, that matches the book cover, made art for the beer can labels. Beautiful. I sent them off to the brewer, just heard back from them this morning, yeah, we can use that as a background. And there's still room for him to add, Counterpoint Brewing logo, the IBU and the ingredients and all the legalities you have to put on alcohol, as well as the label and the information where people can scan the QR code and get something I'm going to talk about in just a second. So yeah, the beer can label is going to have the QR code to get an exclusive story that's going to be given out, like on a beer can or even on the coasters as well, because I'm going to be writing a very special horror story it's going to be titled One Hop Screaming, and it's going to be about a haunted beer or haunted brewery. That's just going to be what I write. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But more on that and on the forthcoming Kickstarter I'm going to be launching in July for this later. The other news is I heard back from Author Nation. I pitched some talks that I wanted to do, and this is in Vegas in the fall. It's the conference that replaces the previously named 20 Books to 50K or 20 Books Vegas conferences. It's a huge indie author conference. It looks like it's going to be so stunning, and I'm going to be talking there. I'm doing a talk on working with bookstores and libraries. And this talk is going to be based on content from two of my books. It's going to be based on an author's guide to working with libraries and bookstores. And it's going to be also based on content going into the book I'm working on right now, A Book in Hand, which is coming late this summer. And that's more about the value of print books for trad authors and indie authors in bookstores and libraries, as well as doing direct sales and just the value of that. So it's just sort of, they work collaboratively because there's going to be a lot of crossover in terms of working with libraries and bookstores and just digging into a lot more details there. So my talk will be based on a lot of the content from that, and I'm really thrilled to be sharing it. I chatted with Joanna Penn. We're scheduling a podcast interview for her awesome The Creative Pen to talk about that. And that'll be later this summer. I promise to get her an art copy before I go on the podcast so she can give it a preview, etc. But speaking of my nonfiction stuff, I'm going to be upping the prices for all of my nonfiction books for writers, just $1 or $2. And but that means I'm gonna create a special coupon code for my patrons. But also one for my podcast listeners in general. So just being a listener, you'll be able to benefit by using a coupon code. That'll be something that'll be for direct sales. And then word to the wise, though, is if you want to get these books really cheap, yes, the prices are going to be going up probably sometime in July. But all of my Stark Publishing Solutions books, actually all my books, my Mark Leslie books, the fiction that I have the rights to that are being published to Smashwords through Draft to Digital, are going to be 75% off for the entire month of July. And this is during the annual Smashwords. I can't smash the words out. I did it again. Smashwords July Summer Winter Sale. And by the way, I normally edit out goofs like that, but I'm going to leave this in. So it's the July Summer Winter Sale for the whole month of July. And this is a coupon code, meaning it's not going to be at a lower price at the other places. And that's the only place you're going to get that great value. So I'm really thrilled about that. But I am going to be walking my prices up on my nonfiction books for writers. But I'm also going to be doing that for my fiction. And I'll be alerting my readers in my newsletter, but also sending that out on social media. I want to give them a chance to get stuff, for $1 cheaper than, just in case. Because again, I don't want to take advantage of people. I want people to be able to get that for a good price. But anyways, when I do that, I'll create some coupon codes specifically for my patrons and coffee buyers, as well as a coupon for my listeners as well, to thank you guys for being there for me. Now, that's it for my introductory matter. I'm going to take your hand and we're going to skip gently across the bumper and listen to what, Gail and Mark back in March had to say. And yeah, that's coming up right after you hear this. Gail, welcome to the Stark Reflections podcast.
Oh my God, I'm so excited to be here. I really am. I'm a listener. So
I know, you're like, this blew my mind. I'm so honored to have you on the podcast because you're Gail Carriger. And I was like, you know who I am? This is just amazing because you're a legend. So thank you. Thank you. This is so exciting. We have so many things because you've done so many things to talk about. The first thing I want to get into, because I think it's really an element of your author branding and how you understand your newsletter and stuff like that. And in your biography, it opens up with Gail Carriger writes books that are hugs. And when that melts me, because a book that is a hug, that's just like you get a nice cup of tea and you're sitting in a nice chair in a sunny window. Maybe there's a cat purring beside you. It just feels like a beautiful experience to escape into. That was obviously carefully crafted, right?
Yeah. And it was that's relatively new too. So I've experimented with different language over the years. At first I was writing only in one genre. And then, I added other genres to it. And for a long time, I used the word cozy. I still occasionally do, but now cozies, I do write cozies, but they're getting very specific definitions in the marketing world. So I finally settled on books that are hugs because I began to realize that the contract I have with my readers is that I'm not going to hurt them. It's going to be, everything will be all right in the end. And if it's not all right, it's not the end. Right?
But I love that. And also when you say hug, it just feels cozy, but it's not, you're not using that marketing term, which is because you
Yeah,
do
yeah,
write
exactly.
you do write a bunch of different genres. You write nonfiction, you write fiction, you write. So that's a great I think it's a great lesson for authors in terms of how to define what this is my promise to my readers, and that's what you're sticking with. I love that. And I want to get
Yeah.
back into that because that's really exciting for me to explore. But let's go in. I really am curious to know. So you have a track record with, all of the places, New York Times and USA Today and Publishers Weekly and Curves, like all those places as a traditionally published author, but you've also embraced indie publishing as well. But where did it all start for you? So when you first put finger on keyboard, what was that like? What's your superhero origin story here?
What's my origin story? I am one of those writers who always wrote. Like, my mom tells a story of me. She was reading The Lord of the Rings, quite frankly. Spoiler, everybody. But she's
Okay.
reading The Lord of the Rings to me. And at the end, I was very upset because it is not as happy of an ending as I wanted. And I basically was like, that is not how it ends. I'm going to now tell you how it ends, mother. And I was like, Mom, you should have known. You should have known from that I was either going to be fanfic or a full-time author.
Right.
Yeah, I always wrote stuff and from the very, very, very beginning. But I also grew up in a sort of commune environment with a bunch of poets. So I was pretty convinced that being a writer is not a good career path. Nobody makes money at it. It's not something you
Right.
should do. So I had a very exciting and highly lucrative career as an academic.
Yeah.
Smart choice, but at least regular hours. Yeah, for years, I was actually working on my PhD and teaching when my first traditionally published book came out and sort of took off.
Did it take
So
off right
yeah,
away?
so I always it well, it was sort of a slow burn. So the short answer is, even though I was always writing, I had a whole career planned out for myself, but I always submitted because I was like, well, I wrote the
Yeah.
thing and I finished it. I might as well see if it can do anything. So I was always
Mhm.
submitting stuff. So I'm definitely one of those authors who has like a trunk full of rejections and all those sorts of things. So Soulless felt to a lot of people like it came out of nowhere, but I swear I paid my dues for a decade trying to get published first. But this was back before, this is 2006, 2007. So there was sort of self-publishing and ebooks, but it really wasn't a big deal yet. This
No,
was
not yet.
very much in the early days of podcasting as well.
Yeah.
So I just was sort of throwing the book out there. And so this was sort of a challenge to myself. Like, can I write all of these things that I'm looking for as a reader? It was the first big paranormal romance / urban fantasy bubble. And I really liked those books, but they tended to be too dark. And I wanted something historical. And I wanted a female main character that was really, really funny. We didn't get a lot of funny books back then either. We still don't. So I kind of wrote Soulless as a dare to myself. And then when it was done, I was like, I might as well send it out. And then, yeah, everything happened after that. I got the telephone call from New York from a publisher that wanted it. I got myself an agent. We went into contract negotiations forever. And eventually it got published, but it was very quirky. It was really weird and odd. And so I wasn't sure. First of all, I was surprised anyone would buy it because where are you going to market this thing? I mean, it's
Yeah.
urban fantasy and romance and historical and humor, and like it's just too much stuff. Like people are going to reject it just because they don't know where it's going to sit on a shelf.
Well, I mean, it was
Um,
pioneering because back then, like that wasn't a big thing. It is now, but back then it was new, right?
yeah, cross genre was really unusual back then for that exact reason. Like you couldn't market, or you couldn't really market digital and appeal to like different pockets of different reader bases. You were supposed to sit in a section of the bookstore so the
Right.
people who read other books like yours could find your book. But there weren't a lot of other books like mine that actually worked in its favor because it was so weird and so quirky, and it had at the time this like really interesting, eye-catching cover that a lot of people read it just because they were like, we don't know what this is. It was also released in mass market, so it was really cheap to pick up.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that sort of, so to answer your question, it was a very slow burn. But by the time, and I'm a pretty fast writer for a traditional author, so they had the second book out 6 months after the first one. And by the
Okay.
time that one
Wow.
came out, I started hitting the New York Times because I'd had this like 6 months of people being like, what is this weird thing? And the people who
Okay.
found Soulless and loved it loved it, loved it. Like they'd never read anything like it. They were
Right.
so excited about it. So the word of mouth was very strong with that book, and then with the series, the whole series.
So was this a case where once the publisher read the first book, they asked like, "Do you have more?" And was it a multi-book deal, or did the second
Oh,
contract come in really fast when they went, "Whoa, this is hitting. Let's get it. Let's get this going."
well, I mean, we can get immediately
Yeah.
into the nitty-gritty of it, but yes, so Soulless was under contract negotiations for almost a year and a half.
Wow.
And that's in part because of me. Because
Okay.
I dig my heels in over contract clauses, which a lot of authors don't do.
Hmm.
But so I was in negotiations with a reputable house that still exists and shall remain nameless.
Okay.
Um, and they had a really broad option clause, otherwise known as the exclusivity clause. And this is
Mm,
essentially the clause that's the publisher says, we get the right to publish the next thing you write. And
right.
the way this publisher had it, they would write, they basically, the language said, we get the right to publish anything you write, like anything you write next. And I was an academic at the time, and I was like, I just can't sign that. I can't give you white papers. Like I
Yeah.
have stuff going to Elsevier, and like I have things on JSTOR. Like I can't give you my stupid archaeology articles, right?
Yeah.
Um, and they were like, well, we don't want those. And I said, well, then put that in the contract,
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah.
Like this is not
Strike this
complicated.
here. Yeah, exactly.
Exclude
Yeah.
nonfiction. And they wouldn't even do that. They like just wouldn't change the boilerplate.
Really?
And so I was like, I will not sign it. Like they might not think the rules apply, but I'm very rule bound and I will do what I am told to do. And I can't have them sitting on my nonfiction articles every time I write something. So
Mm,
I just refused to sign the contract. And eventually my agent had to backdoor and go just to see if there was other interest because we were already in negotiations, which you're not
right.
supposed to do, but she did it anyway.
Oh,
And there was other interest, even though this book was so strange.
yeah.
And so the new publishing house, which offered me 3 times the amount of money, mind you, they knew that I'd already walked away from a contract because of the option clause. And so I got a very generous, very narrow option clause from that house, which
Oh,
was novel length works written under the name Gail Carriger, it's set in an alternate historical fantasy world. And for
oh,
all of the listener, that means that I could write anything that didn't fit those criteria, and I did not have to send it to my existing publisher. However, all of these publishers, whoever I talked to, wanted a second book as at least as part of that contract.
right.
So they all thought that this book, which I thought was a standalone prequel, was the beginning of a series. And
Okay.
I was like, okay, if that's what you want, I'll go back through and throw in some threads and I'm happy. And so I actually had already started writing the second book in the series while all of this contract negotiation was happening because everybody seemed to want that. I mean, I think one of its parent categories is urban fantasy, and I think that's expected in urban fantasy. And these are all
Yeah,
science fiction and fantasy houses that were interested.
right.
Maybe if it had gone to a romance house, they wouldn't have quite been the same.
Yeah, okay.
Mm. Yeah. So I sold the originally under a 2-book contract, and then I put a cliffhanger ending at the end of the second book. And my editor called me up and was like, "What happens next?" And I said, "You put me under a 2-book contract. Why are you talking to me and not my agent? If you would like to know what happens next, you have her telephone number."
Oh, that is fantastic. So you knew early on. How did you know? Was it the research that you had done into it? But how did you know about the clauses to look the contract? Because usually, if it's a first contract, the agent usually handles that. But it seemed like you understood that. Well, you are also in academic publishing, so
Yeah.
that was a
Yeah, that's part of it. I'm also a little bit OCD, shall we say.
okay.
To this day, I think in my agent stable, I'm like the only author who reads all 56 pages of my royalty reports, that kind of thing. I have spreadsheets. I have a love affair with spreadsheets. We can get on to this. We talked about this ahead of time, but I love data analytics, which means what I'm often collecting data on is my own reader base, because that's the
Yeah.
thing I have access to. So I know after 15 years, I know quite a bit out of my reader base. One of the reasons I went indie was direct access to data. My publisher, because I was a front list author for so long, would put me on book tour, and I would come back after 10 days of being totally wrecked and turn around and be like, was this effective? Like, how does this compare to when I'm not on book tour? Did
Yeah.
I actually move the numbers? And could you please show me the data? And they'd be like, no, we think it works. I'm like, that is, you just wasted a lot of time for your feelings on this, a lot of
Yeah.
my time for your feelings. Like, please show me the data. And they didn't. And so I actually started publishing my own work, partly because I just wanted access to the data.
Really?
So
Okay.
yeah, so I read my contract, and I'm sort of mildly interested in that kind of thing anyway.
Well,
So
I think the thing that you've reminded listeners about is remembering that a contract is a negotiation and it's a boilerplate with a lot of, it's just a rights grab.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and authors do have the right to look at a
Say no.
contract and
Yeah.
say, yeah, I can't do this. I was in a similar situation with the first big contract I signed where they wanted the same they wanted those rights, but I had already signed with a smaller publisher for a novel, and I said, "Well, I can't because the next book that's being published is not going to be by you; it's someone else because I've already signed with them." And there was no rights grab like that in their contract. It was a much smaller publisher, so they didn't have that. And so they were gracious enough to come back and very, specify
Yeah.
nonfiction paranormal ghost story book, and it wasn't a right to publish, it was the right of first refusal, meaning
Yes.
I still didn't
Yes.
have to accept their offer if
Yes.
I wanted to do it myself or give it to another
Again,
publisher.
yes. For those listening, that is what the option clause is. It's a right of first refusal, but I need to stress to anybody thinking about this that they can take their time over that. So one of the
Yeah.
problems with a very open option, especially for something like if your publisher has the right to your short stories, which they absolutely should not, because those are something that you
No.
can do a lot with as an author.
Yeah.
Just the fact that you have to submit it to your editor and then wait for them to tell you no is just like that. It could be a year or two if they felt like
Yeah.
it. They can just sit on it, and that's like, for me as a faster writer, I'm like, I'm not a rapid release author, but I am fast. Like that's just not acceptable for me. So I need them to move as quickly as possible, and one way is to keep the option clause tight. So that's one of the reasons. There was another reason for I mean, and sometimes they'll use that option clause to rights grab books that they're actually not going to be good at marketing.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you don't want to sell a YA book to an adult house. They
Yeah.
don't know what to do with that.
Right.
So the next thing you write might be YA just because you feel like it. And then they'll be like, yeah, sure, we'll take it. And you're like, no, wait, no. And then, yes, you have the right to throw it open to another house. But again, what people don't realize is your current house always has the right to give you a better offer than anything else on the table.
Oh, that's right. They can still
So
match. That's right.
they can still
Yeah.
match or exceed, in which case you would be trapped with selling a YA book to a house
To the
that
wrong publisher. Yeah, and you
that's
don't
the wrong
want.
publisher for that book. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's really important to focus on that option clause. I mean, this is the thing, is like, yes, you want to be published as a newer author, but like, always think about, what if you are a real success? Like, what if you are the next Twilight? Like, that's when these contracts become really, really important, and like, and
Yeah.
how you monitor them.
Oh yeah, of course, because then you're getting like a seven-figure offer from another publisher, but you can't do anything
You
with it.
can't do anything with it,
Yeah.
or they can muffle you. They do all sorts of things in contracts. They can do things like publish the first two books in your series, have the option for the third one, and then just decide they don't want to ever publish that again.
Yeah.
And because of the language of your contract, you can't take it back and then publish it yourself. And then you have, not only are you sad because you never got to finish out the trilogy or whatever, but all your fans are sad about it, and you have to be like, it's not my fault, I swear.
Oh
Yeah.
man. So you talked about data and the importance of the data and your love of that. And so I wanted to explore a little bit about, so you said you went into indie publishing because you wanted to have access to the data. You wanted to understand. And that's obviously, you had no access to your readers, basically. It was probably a web, the publisher website had a picture of you with a biography and maybe a link to your website.
Yeah, this is where being like jaded Gen Xer really worked in my favor, I think, because for those of us who have been forgotten, I'm sure there are many Xers out there listening. We are the generation that acquired computers. So my childhood had no computer, and then in high school I started a computer, and then the internet, and so whatever. So like, we remember the before times, but not in a particularly nostalgic way, because X. But what that means is I'm pretty protective of everything around online, and like I'm not a native to that
Yeah.
sphere. I'm an alien. I had to learn it. I didn't grow up in it, right? It is not my culture of origin. And therefore that makes me sort of so deeply innately suspicious of everything to do with the internet and how I present myself on it and all that stuff around it. And for me as an academic, I think that took the form of research, which in the early days of self-publishing was podcasts, which is how I came to your podcast, among other things. Is some of the first podcasters were also the first self-publishing fiction authors that I kind of knew of, and they would talk about it and talk about their journey and talk about, I mean, the first thing I published in 2016, I had to use Sigil and Calibre to code it into an EPUB,
Oh yeah,
right?
I
Like
remember
that.
those.
So
Yeah.
we all remember those days. Like it was way back. And I reached out to podcasting friends to help me do it, like to help guide me through the system of uploading and stuff, because there weren't the resources for it.
Yeah.
But because I had this option clause that allowed for it, when I felt like writing a novella in the same universe as my existing, popular characters, I could do that because novella length was exempted. And so what I did was, and this is what I still recommend to anybody who's moving from traditional publishing to a hybrid model like I have, or to a self-publishing model, is I tested the waters with short stories first, just 99-cent shorts.
Brilliant.
Because I had to from the bad old days.
Yeah.
And that allowed me to make mistakes, like mistakes in those days, mistakes in formatting and cover art and stuff like that. Because there were no guidelines at the time, but also I was dumb and didn't know what I was doing. Yeah, so I tested with a couple of short stories, and I had a big enough fan base so that people did pick them up and buy them, and tell me there were spelling errors and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was not so big, and it was so new, the ebook format, that, but it also allowed me from a marketing perspective to start filling in my storefronts and kind of owning my brand for myself, claiming everything back from the publishers in terms of my seat, my places on the internet. So for example,
Right.
opening an author central account with Amazon and then claiming all my traditionally published books
Yes.
as mine.
And
That
then
actually
you
gave
could
me,
see the Nielsen book scan data.
I had Nielsen
Yeah.
book data. Not only did I have Nielsen book data, I had area data back then. Amazon would show you where you were selling the
Oh,
most
that's
physical
right. They used to
copies.
break it down by
Remember that?
geo in the early days. I remember
I
that. Yeah.
swear I'm the only person who used it
Oh no, it
because
was fantastic because
it
then I
was
could see if
so
I was on
useful.
a radio program in somewhere in the States, I could
Yes,
see. Yeah, but
yes.
that was they got rid of that a long time ago
Too
now.
long ago, but that's what told me that it was effective for me to travel. Because I would go to a convention and then I would watch the spike in the Nielsen data in that part of the world.
Right.
I also used that when I was going on book tours to decide where I was going to go on book tours. Because I would be like, look, I know maybe Philadelphia, you don't have a bookstore contact there or something, but man, do I sell well in Philadelphia. Could we
Yeah.
try to get me there? Like, I don't know why
Yeah.
either. Maybe I just have one librarian who loves me and is telling everybody
Yeah.
about me, or a book
Hey,
group or something.
well, let's get to
But
that
yeah,
library. I bet you they'll bring in a big crowd, right?
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
no. Yeah,
So
wow, I
very
forgot.
useful.
So as we're getting nostalgia about like, yeah,
Mm.
I remember doing that. I mean, I remember when KDP was 35% before Apple came on
Oh
board and gave
gosh.
it to everyone 70. But the early podcasters, I mean, Joanna Penn's been around really, really long, but I was even thinking about people like Merle Lafferty and
That is who, yes,
Paula
yes.
B from the writing show, Scott Sigler. There were a whole bunch of those
Uh,
folks. Matt,
Survivor Guide with T. Morris.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
T. Morris as well.
Guard.
Yeah.
Old
Early,
Guard,
like this,
yeah.
and this was early. I mean, this was before iPhones.
Yeah.
Even I didn't
I
even
had
have
a
a little MP3
podcatcher.
player, right? Yeah.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I had one of those. Yeah, that is exactly it. And those same authors, the ones who had like the Survivor Guide or Murr or somebody, also self-published early on and then
Yeah.
talked about that a lot. And I literally ran up to Murr. When I got to talk to Murr for the first time, I was like such a fangirl. And hilariously, she was such a fangirl. And we had this like hilarious phone conversation. We ended up like doing an interview and then talking for like 3 hours after it. We've been really good friends ever since. But yeah,
That's
because I
awesome.
was like, oh, you're the podcaster, Murr Lafferty. Oh my God.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was so
Mur,
excited.
and everyone probably tells her she should be writing instead of being at the conference and stuff like that, right? Because that was the name of her major podcast, the early one at least. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man. Okay,
Yeah.
so sorry, I couldn't help nostalging about those early
We have to.
podcasts.
It's very important. I mean, how many people listening to this remember those early days? I'm sure there are a few. A
Oh my
few.
goodness. And most of those episodes are still out there. They can still be
Some,
found.
yeah, quite a few of them are archived and up there. And yeah,
Wow.
Mer's podcast, everybody, is called I Should Be Writing. I'm actually the godmother of Ditch Diggers, which is one of her spin-off podcasts, because
Oh,
I sat her. Actually, it was who was it? It was Howard Taylor of Writing Excuses and me. We sat her and Matt Wallace down and we're like, you guys need to do a podcast that's not just about the creative side of writing, but about the business end of writing as well. And they started up Ditch Diggers, which is a spin-off podcast that talks about mostly the traditional side of the publishing industry.
oh wow.
Um,
Love that.
yeah,
Love that. So so
yeah.
let's get into the data again, because I want to explore how you talked about using the data in BookScan and saying, okay, let's go to Philadelphia because I have people are buying my books
Hmm.
there. How are you leveraging data now, both from you still have trad pub books, but you have indie author books.
Yeah.
Is there a way that you merge the data to better understand it? Like, are you a spreadsheet queen? Like,
Yeah.
what's
Oh my God, honestly, this is $64,000 question. Like I have like hours of like interviews where I talk about data analysis because I love it. I'm a social scientist by training and I just love it so much. I think for me, the core reason to do it, it actually goes back to Murr and the I should be writing. Like every moment I'm not writing
okay?
fiction, I'm sort of losing money, right? Now, I am not one of those writers who could write all the time. So my brain does need breaks to do like mechanical, scientific, spreadsheety stuff and then go back to being creative. And I have two
Right.
sides of my brain and I flip-flop back and forth. But I am really into efficiency and I just don't want to do something, especially not something like I super enjoy, like running a bunch of Amazon ads or something, if it's not working
Yeah.
for me
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
an extent that you have to define for yourself what success is and have smart goals and all of those very practical businessy things that I know many writers find difficult. But so I know for me, if I'm going to spend X amount of time on something, I need return on that investment. And so therefore I have to know if it works, what I'm doing. Like I just have to. But what I have is over 35 books and a very rabid fan base. So I can test stuff. I can test stuff ahead of time to see if it works. I ping that fan base all the time. I mean, I just asked them yesterday which kind of shoes I should wear to an event. And I was like, I can't decide, pick a shoe. Um, but I also actually like go in and I'm like, cover art, which one of these do you guys like? I'm thinking of swapping out some cover art for one of my series, and I'm probably just going to
Mm.
ask them, do you think I should keep the covers like this, or should I do something a little bit like this?
Oh, wow.
I just ask them, and then I chart what they say, and I'll often use this for like accepted practices in the publishing industry or in the indie publishing world. And I'll give you two examples. So one example is discoverability. And there's an adage in traditional publishing in particular, which is the thing that sells books the most is word of mouth. And I'm like, is it? But is it? Like everybody says that, but is it? Because I know publishers and they certainly don't have the data on that. And so, and we can talk about what I actually did for that Discover. So I basically just set out to test that on my own fan base, and I have a stats background in part. I have a minor in stats because I'm
Okay.
a social scientist, a couple of master's degrees. And so, and I can get pretty good, pretty viable data. So I can get around 3,000 people participating across all platforms, which is a decent database,
Oh,
but
that's
it
a
is
good data.
biased.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good data
Yeah, it's a
set.
good data set. Yeah. And it is biased because it's my fans, but I know those fans really, really well
Well, they
demographically.
have good
Right.
taste for one, so, so
But I can also put all their biases down. So I can be like, they
yeah.
tend to be more female, they tend to be of a certain age bracket, all of those sorts of
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
So like whenever I talk about data and present it on my blog or anything, I always put all of the codicils at the bottom.
Yes.
Another thing I decided to test relatively recently, which is much easier to test, was when you put a newsletter onboarding hook in a new book, or any book, in fact, should you put it at the beginning or at the end, or both? And there was a lot of discussion going on in like Wide for the Win or something about this. And I was like, well, I've got, 20 self-published books. I will A/B test this. I will just put a bunch of them out there with it at the beginning and a bunch of them out there with it at the end. And then I will try both and I will chart how effective they are. The answer is, incidentally to that one, for me, always, for me and my base, is that the end is slightly more effective, but the beginning is also very effective. So do both, everybody. Do
Really?
both.
Is there
And
you
the
have and you have
reason
a place on your website where you've shared this data,
I
right? I
followed
can
all,
link
yeah.
to in the show notes. Okay, I'm sure there will be listeners
Yeah.
who'll want to go dig into that.
Oh,
Yeah.
so one of the things, and this is a brand thing, is it isn't really my brand to talk back end author industry, which is why I love being a guest on
Oh yeah,
podcasts like
that's
this one.
true because you do that for other
I don't
people. Yeah.
I do it as a pay it forward action. So the discoverability data, the first one that I was testing, I do have that as a full blog post, and you just have to send me an email and I'll give you access.
I'll get that. Yeah, but
It's
then the
back
rest
direct.
of them
I
would
didn't want
be
Google scraping it.
your guest appearance on some other podcast, and I can link to that so people can enjoy more
Yeah.
of you.
Yes. I have
Awesome.
a me talking about data analytics
Okay,
YouTube
cool.
series in which I I accidentally strip, but that's a whole other story.
But that's an
um,
important element because you make that distinction. Yes, you love data, you love the
yeah,
business of writing, you love helping people with it, and oftentimes you're at conferences and on podcasts talking about it. But your fan base is so rabid
yes, yeah.
that you just got back from a very special event from fans, right? Are you willing to share
Oh,
that?
the wedding. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. To close a gap on that statement, though,
yeah.
I don't present stuff like the testing of the newsletter sign up sheet, partly because I don't want them to feel like they're being studied or manipulated, even though the super
Oh,
fans kind of know that they are.
yeah.
Um, and we'll probably be listening to this, but also because one of my mainstay drivers of traffic to my newsletter, which is a point of view to my newsletter, to my website, which has a point of view of onboarding to my newsletter,
Right.
is SEO still. And my SEO is very good. And I have an old blog with a lot of authority and relevancy. And so I get readers following me and interacting with me via my blog and my website still. So
Wow.
that needs to be specifically tailored to my readers. So I don't want to pollute my Google scraping algorithm with a lot of blog posts about the industry.
Yeah.
Because that would mess up my retention and my onboarding to my newsletter ultimately. So there's like the real reason behind the scenes. So I do occasionally, just for my own articulation, chronicle some of my discoverability data. I did a
Yeah.
big Amazon has switched its business model. I'm going to chart what I think is going to happen over the next 5 years blog post as well. And I'm happy to say, like, I'll then go in and put the date that Amazon does the thing that I thought they were going to
Yeah.
do. I
It's
was
like,
like,
oh,
oh,
I was
they're going
off
to
by a
raise
month,
KU
but
subscriptions. Yep. So I do stuff like that for
right.
my own interest and for other people and for podcasts like this. But you do have to email me for access. So if you
Okay.
want that discoverability data, email me. My assistant is prepared. She gets
Okay.
people requesting that one all the time. So yeah, I talked about it on Publishing Rodeo, and now occasionally somebody is still like, "Can I see the data?" Which good on you for wanting to see the data, because
Yeah.
when somebody speaks with authority on a subject, you should want to see all of the details of behind that voice of
Yeah.
authority.
Yeah.
Back to the branding thing. So
Yeah.
repeat
Well,
the question.
I was asking the question because I have a diluted brand. I'm all over the map. Chicken with his head cut
Yeah.
off. I don't know who I am from one day to the next. So my
Which means
own
people searching for you don't either,
Yeah,
right?
and that's one of the challenges I've never really embraced. And I've tried to split off Mark Leslie Lefebvre from Mark Leslie because this is the guy who's gonna be the chills and thrills guy, and here's the business guy. But again, I haven't done a good job. So I'm always eager to learn about so that focus on the brand because and again I go back to Wright's books that are a hug, and you said that's a new thing. What was the
Yeah.
previous one? And I guess is the hug thing an experiment or like how do
No,
you
no. So the first one was Hail the Victorious Parasol, because that
oh,
was
of
a
course.
joke for the steampunk universe. And then I branched into more romance heavy urban fantasy slash paranormal romance. And so that didn't work for that
Yeah.
brand. And so then I experimented with various iterations of cozy or found family, which again are both trademarks of the kind of style of book I write.
Yeah.
And then I just settled on book hugs because it felt like very all-encompassing. And like just now talking to you, I realized that even when I do nonfiction, they're kind of hug-like. So when I
Yes.
wrote The Heroine's Journey, like one of its premises is like, as writers, we have to connect. Like you have to connect with other writers, you have to perform a protective huddle, you have to communicate with other writers at the same stage in their career as you, because these are going to be sort of lifelong friends with whom you can do things like discuss contract terms and protect yourself. And it's almost like I wrote a nonfiction hug too. So I guess I keep doing it.
They are all hugs.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, they're
I love
all
them.
hugs. So I think I think I sit very kind of comfortably there. So I don't think it'll change for a bit. So yeah, from a branding perspective, that's how I ended up there. Also, one of the things, again, because I collect data all the time and I talk to my readers constantly, one of the things I've realized after 15 years or more in this field is that when we as authors or members of the publishing industry at all talk about anything from tropes to genres to marketing, we don't use the same language that readers do. And it's really important when you're talking to readers or pitching to them or trying to convince them to become a new fan to use the language they understand.
Right.
For example, romantasy means what it means. Like, I don't care what trad is marketing as romantasy. TikTok has decided what romantasy is.
Yes.
And we don't have a say in that we don't get to change that. They've made that decision. The readers have spoken. It is whatever they think it is. And I think we forget that. So the discoverability data, for example, the first thing I did was actually go to Twitter, and I think it was still Twitter at the time, and just ask people to tell me how they discovered books. And I specifically said, how do you find a new book or a new author? And I wanted them to use their vocabulary with me. And I could do this, because on social media, I only ever talk about things that have to do with my reader base. I never talk about being an author. So I have some author friends, but most of my friends on Facebook or Twitter or whatever are my readers.
Yeah.
And I've carefully sort of cultivated that over the years. And so all of these readers would reply to me and they would just say, well, like I usually get my recommendation from a friend. And then I would be like, does that mean like in person or an online friend or an influencer who you consider a friend, right? Like there are nuances to this. So I use social media to have a nuanced conversation to try and understand the language. So like a reader is not going to say brick and mortar store is how I find a book. They're going to say, I go to my local bookstore, like chain of command or whatever it's called, right?
Yeah.
Or so like I needed the right language to phrase the polling questions when it came time for the official polling questions so that the readers understood what I was asking for them. And I definitely had a point of view with the discoverability as well. Like, for example, for me as a hybrid and mostly indie these days, I made a distinction between libraries and bookstores. Readers actually don't. Readers tend to categorize the same reader that finds new authors in a bookstore often finds new authors in a library. The foot traffic reader, right? So those people would often say, well, I just go to the library or the bookstore and see what's on display. And I'm like, okay, but I divided those as two separate options in my poll because I, as an indie author, can reach libraries easily, but I can't reach bookstores very easily.
Right.
So I do have a point of view when I'm running these kind of polls or whatever. And then I just constructed the polls using their language. And to answer I'm not going to leave you all in suspense. Yes, recommendation from a friend, aka word of mouth, is by a landslide the number one reason people find a new author. Weirdly high up there are some things that I think newer authors and traditional publishers don't realize, one of which is a recommendation from another author. And that is not a repost or retweet of your carefully tailored launch image. It's actually another author like in their newsletter or on Twitter just saying, hey, I read this really good book. It was awesome. And it's called blah, blah, blah.
And it's an authentic share, right?
An authentic share. And that is way, way more powerful than a book blurb on a cover art or in your marketing data. Unless, of course, you're keywording for that author's audience, which just a different trick.
There was a great
But
CBC here in Canada, CBC. They did a really short. It was like a 20-minute episode on the dirty business of book blurbs,
yeah,
and just the way
yeah,
because in trad publishing, it's a major part of the business that, and it's kind of like, yeah, I'll blurb them. Tell me what the book's about. Okay, blah 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 blah, bam, right?
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, when I was in the heyday of the Parasolverse, back in like 2010 to 2016 or thereabouts, I was getting so many requests for blurbs constantly. And the one thing I try to do always is never lie to my readers. Like, I'm never going to recommend a book if I didn't like it and if I didn't read it. And I am a fast reader, but I also am really picky about what I read. There's a lot of stuff I just don't like.
yeah,
And there was a lot of me being like, would you describe this book as dark and gritty?
right.
Because then I'm just not going to read it. Like, I'm sorry, like it's just, and I'm not going to recommend it because I just don't think it's what my readers are interested in. Now, again, something I've learned over the years is how my reader base is a lot more egalitarian and a lot less picky than I am, and how they read more widely than I would have thought,
Yeah,
considering the rabid fans are rabid fans, but they also do read horror, or they do read dark, or they do read stuff that I don't read or write.
right.
But yeah, but that, I mean, as a person giving blurbs, you have to be thoughtful as well, because you don't want your brand associated something that, at least until recently, would have affected your also bots on Amazon, for example. Like, I'm not going to blurb something where it's going to show the best book ever written, Gail Carriger, and then that fills in my also bots, and it's something that I genuinely don't think my readers would like, and it's going
Yeah.
to cause cross promo problems. So,
Wow.
yeah. I mean, really big name authors don't have to think
Yeah.
that much
Well,
about that
if
kind
we
of thing. It
know their
doesn't really
name,
matter.
yeah, if you know the
Yeah,
name, then
exactly.
it doesn't. It's like Stephen King blurbed it. Okay, yeah, well,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Brandon Sanderson, or,
yeah,
whatever.
exactly. They're not
Yeah,
worried about
they
that.
don't have to worry.
Yeah.
But yeah. So that was the discoverability. Those were two interesting things. Another one that was very interesting is I was surprised, at least out of my reader base, a large portion of which come out of traditional publishing, which does mean something. It does make a difference
Yeah,
to
yeah.
a lot of stuff I do, especially in terms of like price point and stuff. But a lot of them said they actually followed the different publishers on social media, which I was shocked by, like
Oh,
Tor or Orbit or
yeah. Oh,
whatever.
okay. Wow.
Yeah, I didn't think
So
readers did
as a
that.
genre fan, they follow that brand. So
Exactly. Yeah.
okay. All right. That
Yeah,
makes
which I
sense.
didn't realize the publisher brand had that much clout and power. I'm not surprised by Tor, but like you can go over to their Instagram feeds and they don't have a ton of followers, and you're like, okay, but I guess the people who are following them are quality and are readers paying attention to what's going on. So
Wow.
that was interesting. So yeah, so the discoverability data was pretty fascinating for me. But I did go through a process of making sure I was communicating the questions in a way that they would say these things if we were having a conversation.
You sort of, I was thinking about, you're familiar with the book, The Languages of Love?
Yes,
There's
yes.
4 different love languages and different people communicate love in different ways. And I'm thinking that there's a Gail Carriger book potentially that is the languages of reading love. Something because it's the way that readers approach their love of books, and it is completely different than what the industry might think. Right? They
Yeah.
have
I will recommend a podcast to
yeah.
everybody out there. I know, I'm sorry, I'm on one pack, but podcasts, once you're a podcast listener, you listen to a
Yeah,
lot
you
of
listen to
podcasts.
multiple podcasts. It's not a competition. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
We share the love.
And that is a podcast called Reading Glasses, and it's part of the Maximum Fun Network. But it is run by 2 readers. Now, one of them is an author, Mallory. I actually know her. We're friendly,
Okay.
but she's nonfiction, and she doesn't seem to hang out with the fiction authors all that much. But it is really run from a readerly point of view, and they interface with their particular listener reader base quite a bit as well. And I would recommend authors subscribe and listen to it. Don't push to be on it or anything like that, but just use it to understand the language that readers use. And the 2 hosts have very specific genres that they like. And again, not something I write or read myself, but they have people write in with their reading wheelhouses. They'll talk about tropes and things like that. And it's just you're listening to it for the linguistics of it, for the way readers talk and think about books.
I love that.
And for me, it's a little bit of a kinder way to consume it than to bop onto Book Talk or bop over to YouTube's, BookTube, because I'm like, that can get a little emotionally rough for me.
Yeah.
Even if they're not talking about my books. Reading glasses for me, as a podcast consumer, is just a very, it's a thought experiment, and you don't have to listen to every episode or anything,
Yeah.
but it is a thought experiment. I think it behooves you as an author to understand readers are different creatures.
Yeah.
This is me developing systems, but
Right.
I divide fandoms into quadrants as well, a little bit like your love languages. Having come out of fandom, I was a total fangirl in high school. I used to go to Star Trek conventions and all of my local sci-fi conventions. I cosplayed everything you imagine. So I'm interested in fans and fan behavior as a culture and as a sort of social scientist, and sort of studying them and what they do.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've noticed about the fandom is that they all behave in like distinctly different ways. And of course, no one has one love language, right? Like, but they sort of lean into it, and kind of understanding them and the way they talk about books and the way they react to you as the writer of the thing that they love helps you better cater to their needs, both in the online sphere and in places like your newsletter.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So I'm taking up so much of your time. We did so many things to talk about. So I'm thinking about the curation of your author brand that you put out on social media, that you put in your newsletter, that's on your website, that even, virtual appearance, that you've got the very distinctive look. When I saw you at Superstars, well, there's Gail, and you're immediately recognizable.
Yes.
Even if someone's
I
never
did
met
that.
you before, they know it was like, I know who that is.
Yes. Yes, that's in total. Like, I will tell a very brief, one of my
Yeah.
early first jaunts to Comic-Con back in the real heyday. I think it was 2012. I
Yeah.
think it was my first trip to Comic-Con. And I'm standing in like the middle of Hall H, right? It is madness. There's 130,000 people, and somebody comes like jetting across the crowd at me and is like, "You're Gail Carriger, you're Gail Carriger." And I was dressed like I'm always dressed, and I was like, it works. Because even in the land of geeks and cosplay, like someone walking around knew exactly who I was. And that is the point as far as I'm concerned. Like, I developed, yes, I love dressing up.
Yeah. Well,
but I did develop
it's something you enjoy anyways, and it's on brand with your books. So
and I'm social. So I want people to come up to me at conventions.
Yeah, and you did that in 2012.
Yeah, way back.
Was that something that you learned and developed over time, or is it something that was already there and you just embraced it? I mean, how did that
I hit the ground running with that one. Yeah, because when Solus first came out, I was already in fandom, and I was already into cosplay.
Right.
But I was also a pretty hardcore academic. So I had 2 master's degrees and I was working on my PhD, and I was pretty sure I would be doing that. And I wasn't sure if it was a great idea for a hardcore academic to have this reputation for writing incredibly silly, fluffy, sometimes quite sexy science fiction, fantasy, romance. I mean, at the time, it was mostly science fiction and fantasy, but I knew I wanted to write lots of different things.
Right.
So I knew I would have a pen name, and I was pretty sure I wanted to have a persona. I also had this sort of vision of going to New York, getting off a plane, wearing a black and white pencil skirt specifically, and meeting with my publisher and my agent. And I was like, and I would look fabulous and very retro. I love dressing retro anyway. So there's also an excuse to access bits of my closet that I didn't get to wear regularly.
Why not?
Like, as a field academic, my training's archaeology, and so I'm wearing big stompy boots and jeans and getting very coffee, right? That's like most of my life. So the opportunity to dress in a cute retro dress was not to be missed as far as I was concerned.
Of course,
so
yeah. And
so
sometimes on some of the digs, the parasol may come in handy, though, right?
True.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, true. Usually it's just a big hat, though.
Big floppy brim hat.
Big floppy hat. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So that's so I knew that Gail would be Gail from the get-go. I also, like on the DL, but as a geek myself, wanted to be able to run around at a con and not be constantly approached by people. Like, I wanted to be able to still be a fan. And that meant having a kind of chameleon aspect, and very rarely do people recognize me out of uniform. So,
oh my God, I never thought of that. That way you could get from point A to point B if you like at a place where like, I need to get from this stage to that stage.
Yeah,
quickly.
fast.
And I love my fans and I want to talk to them, but I don't want to look rude. So that if you
Yes.
don't look like Gail, then
Yes.
you
Yeah.
can do, oh,
You
I
don't
love
look
the way
like
you
Ale.
do.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
take off the markers. I mean, humans have a very
Yeah.
pattern recognition, focus to them. So if I can take off the patterns, people usually don't recognize me. I've had that broken twice. A couple people have recognized me out of uniform, so to
Oh,
speak,
the
and I was always
real
very
diehard fans
surprised.
that really, but no, I could see that. Yeah, I mean, because if I suddenly put on like a long wig and was wearing not the usual stuff that I wear at a conference, I could probably get away,
Or
cover this
change
up
your
somehow.
facial hair. That would be
Yeah.
a big one.
Oh, that'd be
Yeah,
a
if you change
huge
your
one. Yeah,
facial
people
hair.
wouldn't even know who I was. I mean, Kevin Anderson, I remember we were friends for a long time, and then I started shaving my head and I grew a beard, and I hadn't seen him in 6 months. And when I was picking him up at the airport and he comes off the plane, my son and I are there waving at him, and he's looking, he's like, well, not, I don't know that bald
Who's
guy. And he's
that
looking.
person? Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that
that's
was
that's
that was
kind of
funny.
that's kind of how I decided to do this is I change my look up pretty regularly just when I feel like it. And I did that. And I used to work the Renaissance Fair. I was walking into Build and wandered up to the booth, and my boss, who I'd worked for years at that point, like just like I was having an anime moment. So I had like crazy, pink like
Yeah.
fake wig and like a, crop top and big huge shoes or whatever. And that completely didn't recognize me. And I was like, man, I could be a spy or something. Like, John, you've known me for a decade. Like,
That
what do you
is,
mean you don't recognize
oh
me?
man.
Yeah, so that was actually a formative experience where I was like, I think I can do this. And it is really nice. It's really nice to be able to like be a guest at Comic-Con, but also go to Comic-Con, and wander around and yeah, and it's not like I'm such a big deal that I'm going to be swarmed or something, but it's just nice to have anonymity occasionally if you really want it. I don't do it as much as I used to,
But it
but
allows you to just like kind of let your hair down and enjoy being a fan and not having to worry about potentially offending someone if you're not attending
yeah,
to them or something like that.
exactly.
You know, I get that. I get that. So as we get close to wrapping up, there's so many questions I want to ask. First question I ask is, would I be able to convince you to come back on a podcast in the future so we could, dig into the
Anytime.
heroine's journey and
I'd be delighted.
oh,
Yeah,
thank you.
anytime.
So yay.
Anytime.
Okay, yay. I'll put that, check that off. And
I love it more than anything. I mean, you're a joy to talk to. And like I said, it's my opportunity to give it forward. And I don't do my own sort of educational writer podcast. So
yeah,
I really I want to help people as much as possible.
thank you.
But like I said, like my time is relatively limited. So I had to be like, I can't one-on-one mentor. That's just not a
No.
vehicle that works for me. So trying to do it this way as far as I'm
Well,
concerned, the best
you're
I
spreading the Gale love, and I appreciate that. So thank you.
can.
So I'm just curious, sort of close to the last question here is, what are you excited about now? And is there something that you're working on that you really wanted to share, either with any of your readers who may be listening or other writers, just so we can kind of get a glimmer of what's coming up?
Well, I know this audience, so I will mostly talk to writers, but so I do have a craft book called The Heroine's Journey, which is essentially a sort of alternative model to the hero's journey. It's just a way to approach a broad narrative structure that isn't the hero's journey. So if you're somebody who has tried writing the hero's journey and you find it doesn't really work for you, or you really struggle with some of the sort of core tenets of that, just there's an alternate out there. And
Yes.
I studied it as a background in classics, and I was very shocked when I went into the writer's world and realized that a lot of people had studied the hero's journey in Campbell, but never like the Demeter myth and the heroine's journey. So I was like, okay, where's this book? And then eventually I had to write it. So I do have a craft book out there. And if you like the way I communicate and talk and sort of am kind of casual, it's written in that style. I wrote it to be sort of breezy and accessible and kind of bloggy, for lack of a better term. So it should be pretty easy to consume. I tried to make it very, very friendly for readers. So that's the
Awesome.
heroine's journey. I'm also working on a new one, which I really shouldn't talk about, but because
But just
it's
knowing that you're working on a new one is like, okay, here's my money.
and it is called Going Hybrid.
Okay.
And it's basically how to move from essentially a traditional publishing to self-publishing without going insane. And it has a lot of
And it's much
trad
needed.
mid-list authors
And
sidle
it's
up to
much
me.
needed because there's so many
It's really needed.
predators in
Yeah.
the industry too, right? Like
Yeah.
and a nice innocent traditionally published author who's never had to
Yeah.
who walk the dirty streets might not know that there's people like, hey, little boy, come on over here. I'm going to show you
Yes.
something, and then bilk them for $15,000.
Yes, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
self-publishing advice that's specifically written and targeted and correctly, quite frankly, at new authors entering the self-publishing space. But if you have an existing career, even if it's not a very large one, it's
Yeah.
very different for you.
Yes.
And there are different ways to structure and proceed with an idea towards balance. It's a little bit like coming at this KU or exclusive versus non-exclusive.
Yeah.
It is like very briefly, for example, your price points are different. Like I can just have a higher price point than a lot of other self-published authors because my books are being compared to my traditionally published books
Right.
prices. So it just works differently for us. And there will be tips and tricks in there that are also useful for anybody, especially anybody who has any kind of established track record in the industry. But yeah, and it's just too many authors at cocktail parties being like, so Gail, this newsletter thing, and me being like, you have been writing for 20 years and you do not have a newsletter. It is
Yes.
not that difficult. Please change that. So I finally was like, I gotta write this all down.
Oh,
And
man.
it's me, so it's like worksheets and checklists and charts
Yeah.
and
And
and, all,
approachable,
and
right?
it's very
And
practical.
conversational, which is
Yes.
amazing. Yeah. So even though,
And it'll
like, when
be
people
like,
see worksheets and they get excited and, oh, that's too much work, it's scary.
yes.
No, no, Gail makes it approachable.
I do. I try to make it really approachable. So it'd be like, this is what I do. Here's an example if you would like a template, and here's a checklist if you would prefer a checklist, right?
Oh,
So
beautiful.
it's those sorts of that sort of thing. But it is a beast. It's a
Oh, I
lot of
can imagine. Yeah.
information.
But I'm going to go line up now to go buy it. So.
And it'll probably be, I'm thinking it's at now at 150,000 words. I'm like, I think we're going to be in two parts. So
Right.
there'll be like a laying all the foundation work, and then there'll be a sort of advanced, like
Right.
setting up your analytics and stuff like that. So yeah. For those who are interested in how I track things like the aforementioned, where is it better to put a link in your newsletter, that
Yeah.
kind of thing, I use a handy dandy WordPress plugin called Redirection. And I actually have a blog post, and you can Google Gail Carriger redirection, or you can even go gailcarriger.com/redirection, and a redirect will direct you to that blog post, which
Wow.
explains how to set that up. That is my big hot tip on a tracking tool for any authors out there who already have, content and stuff like that, and are just interested in figuring out what's working for them. That's
Right.
what I use the most. And yeah, and if you do want to try my fiction, which you never know, I write funny almost all across the board. It's book hugs. Everybody's good. Everyone's happy. It all comes out all right in the end. And I write in different lanes. So you can read some of my historical steampunk stuff, or you could read some of my sexy urban fantasy, or recently wrote sci-fi trilogy that I'm very proud of, which is essentially the aliens are coming for us and they want our K-pop. So
Well, what else would they come for?
exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Oh my
Essentially,
God.
it's me kind of dealing with celebrity and what it means to be semi-famous or whatever, but also
Yeah.
like what is the nature of entertainment as a cultural power? Like, can it be used to conquer a galaxy? If it's good enough, and if that music is that good, can it rule the world essentially? So
Oh, I love that. I love that. So where can people go check out Gail Carriger online so we can
Gail
explore all
Carriger
these worlds?
yeah, all these worlds. I just tell everybody to go to gailcarriger.com, especially if you're interested from the author perspective, because all of my social medias are tailored to my readers.
Yeah.
So yeah, you gotta go to my website, and it'll steer you whatever direction you'd like to be steered in, including there's a contact page if you want that discoverability data, for example. Just drop me a calling card, and I will, or my lovely assistant will tell you how to get into that blog post, among other things.
Well, this was so riveting. Like the hour that we were chatting felt like 5 minutes. And so thank you so
Oh,
much for spending so much time with me. I tried not to use too much of your time, but we ended up going the full hour. Thank you, Gail, so much.
Mark, thank you. It has been truly, truly a pleasure. I am very honored to get to be on your podcast. I'm so used to your voice in my ear.
Wow.
Yeah. So
I
it's been a
still can't
real.
believe that I'm just gonna faint here. So thank you again for being a guest and hanging out with me.
It's been such a joy, and absolutely, let's do this again sometime.
Okay, so this again, I nerded out. I had so much fun chatting with Gail. I could have kept going for another hour. We're just having a really good time chatting, and I mean that's the longest conversation I've had with her, and I can't believe, shame on me, that I took so long to work up the courage to invite her to come on my podcast. So many things to reflect on. I'm going to try and do brief. Yeah, Mark, we know what your brief is. I'm going to try and do a bunch of brief notes of things that I just made notes of as I was editing this. So the right of first refusal clause, and I talk about this a lot, but I neglected, and Gail reminded me, and this is so important, I neglected to remember, I can give it to a publisher and they can make an offer, and if I don't like the offer, I can say no, but they can sit on it. They can play dirty if they wanted to, and they can sit on it for however long, unless there's something in the clause about that. So that's ding, 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 ding. A bell went off in my head. I was like, okay, I got to remember that. Don't just worry about right of first refusal. Is there a time limit on that as well? So they're not going to hold something that I could potentially, do something else with, or send out to another market, etc. So the other thing to reflect on is the genius of her putting a cliffhanger at the end of the second book in a 2-book contract. I love that. And her editor calls her up. It's like, what the heck? Hey, you should be talking to my agent if you really want to know. I love, like, just genius. I mean, she plans, and obviously she does analytics and is a spreadsheet fanatic. And so she loves to plan things out. And I really admire that about her. And that takes a lot of moxie, which I just so admire. And so the recommendation, this is the thing that she talks about for hybrid authors, and is so important, or authors who are curious about self-publishing, is the recommendation to start with short stories. That is what I did in the early years, and it's mostly because I had a lot of short stories. Yeah, okay, the first book I self-published was 20 years ago, One Hand Screaming, a collection of short stories. But I mean, the ebooks didn't exist in a way that we could access them in 2004 when I did that. I did make it available as an ebook, but I also experimented when that came several years later, like Kindle and Smashwords, etc. were out there. But it was the some short stories that I did as ebooks in the early days, and I did make a lot of mistakes, and I put really horrible covers on, and in some of my presentations I share is like, yeah, look, this was the first cover, haha, I know it's pretty horrible. And this is the cover I revised, and when I revised the cover, then my sales went from A to B, and it, like, just wow, imagine that the cover actually helped it sell. So that I think is really important, and it's something I do talk to authors about who are curious, indie curious. And so Gail's podcast recommendation, which was to the podcast for readers, which is called Reading Glasses. Just wanted to reiterate that because it sounds amazing. And her thought that authors should subscribe to it and listen to it, not to try and pitch them to get on their podcast. It's not about that. It's market research. Listen to what readers are saying. So if you don't have a newsletter with thousands of readers who can give you that feedback the way Gail gets it, this podcast is an amazing resource for you. You can listen and you can see the language that readers are using. And I think we forget that sometimes, especially if you're starting like, but I don't have an audience yet. Okay, well, here are readers, and they're going to be talking about different styles of books, and they're going to have their preferences and stuff, but you're going to be able to hear how they talk differently about different books. And I think that's so important for us to do that research. Again, this is an insight into Gail's very deliberate, analytical, business-oriented mindset. She's a lot of fun, but she also knows what she's doing, and she's very careful about that. And then the other thing, and this goes back to the curation of her author brand and her name and all those things, and just how effective that is just genius. And yeah, I'm doing a talk on author branding at CanCon in Ottawa in November, and I'm really excited to return to CanCon. It's been a long time. Perfect timing for me to be doing some book events in Ottawa while I'm there, so it's like, hey, double duty. But that alone, the author branding is brilliant. But I want to talk specifically about this getting from point A to point B when she's at a conference or a con, and having the Gail Carriger persona, and then shucking it off and just looking a different way, as she can get from stage A to stage B without being stopped. And I know it sounds like a weird thing to say, because I am the furthest thing, from celebrity, but there are conferences that I'm at. I'm tall and recognizable, the bald guy with the sports coat and stuff like that. And apparently I have a recognizable voice, because I've had people call out saying, I know that voice, and they recognize me mostly it's from being on Joanna Penn's podcasts. But that is hard when I need to get, and this happened at 20 Books last year. I finished on one stage, and fortunately I didn't have to go too far, but I had to get out, pack up my laptop, rush off, and get to the next room to set up for my next thing. It wasn't just a panel I could just get there. I had to get there early and test the tech and all that stuff. And the thing I hate to do, and this is really hard, because when you finish a talk, there's usually a lot of people who want to come up and ask one-on-one questions, and I love answering those questions. I really love it, and I hate when I have to politely excuse myself. But when you're incognito and you're anonymous, and you can get from stage A to stage B without having to feel, because I hate being rude to people, without having to, it's like, I'm sorry, I gotta go. I hate doing that. It's like, I want to find you later and buy you a drink to make up for it. So I'm horrible at saying no to people, but there are times when I have to rush. I have to get somewhere. It's really important. And I think there's a huge value in that, in the persona, when the persona is so huge and it takes over. Is a great way to take that persona off, and you can kind of make your way to another place, or just be a fan and enjoy yourself. Like, hey, I just want to sit back and enjoy this other person who's on stage, and not have anyone pay attention to me. I want them to pay attention to the person on stage. So there's some value in that when you're crafting your author brand, because hey, let's pretend that the worst of all possible things happen and you become world famous. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to just be anonymous and to just go somewhere and just kind of let your hair down, proverbially speaking. Anyways, that's my long rambling reflections. What are your reflections? What did you think when you were listening to that conversation with Gail? Love to hear what you think. You can leave comments over at starkreflections.ca. I'm getting comments over on YouTube as well. So thank you guys for those comments. You can also email me, of course, mark@markleslie.ca. But thank you, dear listener, for letting me bend your ear. I hope you loved listening to Gail as much as I loved having her on as a guest. But that is it, as I said, for this episode. If you want to support the podcast, well, you are supporting it just by listening, but I would appreciate a review wherever you listen to podcasts, or better yet, share this episode or other episodes with someone that you think would find value in the episodes. So again, thank you for listening. Until next week and next episode. Oh, I lied, because I'm going to be sneaking in an episode on June, because I'm going to be sneaking in an episode on June 15th. It is a special interview I did with Daniel Wilcox and Samantha Frost, the editors of Bolts of Fiction. See, I forgot this in my personal update. I'm sneaking it in now. I've got Flash Fiction. It's Flash Fiction, National Flash Fiction Day in the UK, which is where they're from, and Devil's Rock Publishing is releasing Bolts of Fiction. I have 2 Flash Fiction stories in there, and I made Sam cry with one of them, so I'm really pleased. That I love when a story can do that to someone. But I interviewed them. It's coming out at 3 a.m. UK time on June 15th. There's a video I'll have a link to that in the show notes at starkreflections.ca. But also, there will be an episode that drops around that time, 3 a.m. UK time on Saturday, June 15th, 2024, which is my interview with Sam and Dan about flash fiction and the cool stuff they're doing and why that's important. And we have a really, really good time. It's a relatively shorter interview and short episode. But yeah, so I lied, and my apologies. I accidentally lied when I said next week and next episode, because you'll hear me again in just, very soon, because this episode usually drops Thursday night in the feed and Friday in the show notes. But until next episode is what I should have said. This is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incognito.com.